Hey, what's up, YouTube? Enforcer5150 here, and I hope you had an amazing weekend. Because this weekend, what I did is I gone ahead and I finally got access to my Monster Hunter World. So I wanted to do a few things real quick here and show what we can actually do with Monster Hunter World with the 1080 Ti and the AMD Ryzen 7 2700X. Now, I want to give a big thanks to DigitalFoundry as they did a very comprehensive guide and performance tips on how to get close to the Xbox One X performance. I definitely suggest going over there and checking out the video. He uses the 1060. So further in this video, I'm going to go ahead and use some of them settings of the best optimized settings that he put in there, and I want to see how they work with 4K on the 1080 Ti. So running at maximum settings in 4K, the game will go pretty much no more than 34 frames per second. I did a lot of, trying to see if there was something that was wrong. Maybe if I could just try to overclock a little bit, and it really doesn't do that much even with overclocking. Now, if you look in perspective of how the Xbox would actually run the game, it only runs it at, say 35 to, I think 40 to 45 frames per second on console. So we're not really going to try to compare that. We're just going to kind of see what we can actually achieve on, the 1080 Ti, maxing everything out, and then we're going to bring everything down, to low settings and the optimized settings from DigitalFoundry. One thing is that it is actually somewhat playable even at 35 to 40 frames per second. Bringing a few things down and bringing it to an optimized setting definitely helps and makes the gameplay experience a lot better. So these are the settings that DigitalFoundry came up with to get below the Xbox One settings. Basically, they're optimized for the 1060 that he was testing them with. So I wanted to replicate this with the 1080 Ti at 4K and see if I can get to the 60 frames per second that had failed in the 1060 in this video. So now the resolution won't be exact on here because I foolishly left my recorder going and there was 77 gigabytes of data to try to import. So instead I just recorded the media player of it playing back the video. But it does have the same information that we have here. As you notice, that this is with the optimized settings, and we get anywhere from 50 to 55 frames per second, and it dips down to about 45 frames per second. Now, in my opinion, this is a lot more playable than the 30 frames per second. I mean, some people, the 35 frames per second is just fine, especially with a game like this. If it was like a first-person shooter or something like that, it'd be completely unacceptable and just straight unplayable. I'd say anything over 40, 45 would be decent for a game like this. I'm using my Xbox controller and playing it on the TV in this one, so that I kind of got that whole 4K more console feel than I would playing at my desktop, which we'll get into the desktop gameplay here in a moment. And as it was mentioned in the DigitalFoundry video, there is a lot of the things that are actually still broken in the game that we can have to just assume that it's broken, like the reflections and like the volumetric fog really doesn't do a lot, but it definitely hits your performance, and that's you kind of want to bring that down in some cases. So let's go ahead and we're going to move on to another resolution here. So now, in my opinion, 1440p max settings is probably the best place for the 1080 Ti and the Ryzen 2700X or pretty much any CPU. We really have everything that we really wanted to get to, which is the 60 frames per second. It dips down just below 60 at slight times, barely goes down there. The only time that you get under there is in the city. It seems like it'll jump down in some of the more condensed areas, but most of the gameplay will remain around that 60 frames per second, and everything feels a lot better. As you'll notice, that some of the foliage areas is about the only spot that you're going to start seeing the dips under 60 frames per second. But for the most part, in some of the desert areas and some of the fights, as long as you're not in some of the condensed areas, you're always over that 60 frames. I don't really like jumping under 60 if I'm playing on my TV. The reason why is because it doesn't have G-Sync. When you have G-Sync enabled, then you don't have to worry about that, weird tearing or shearing that you'll see that tearing on your screen, whenever it starts dropping from under 60 frames per second to above 60 frames per second, because that's the refresh rate that you only have. So with the G-Sync on, you have, a straight, smooth gameplay that you don't really have to worry about that. Now, I say this is pretty much the best settings for, or not the best settings, but the best resolution for the 1080 Ti, because even at 1440p 2K, it still has a crisp feel to it. Even if you're running on a 4K monitor TV, it still looks decent. 4K definitely looks better, and you can't deny that. I mean, it's 2 times better. I mean, it just looks better. Everything looks a lot more, hard edged and crisp, and it's just. I think that if you want to get to close to 60 frames per second, or at least over 40, 45, 50 frames per second, where the gameplay starts seeming smooth, I would definitely say run everything at 1440p. Now, I want to also, go into lower settings and lower resolutions. So now what we're going to do is go to 1080p and put everything at its highest settings. You would think that with 1080p, everything on high, we should get, a lot more frames per second. And now, unfortunately, I did not see a gigantic jump. We did get a more like 30 frames per second more. We stayed over 60 frames per second all the time, but what I was hoping for was being able to get to around 120, 144, so we can take advantage of high refresh rate monitors. Even when we try to change a lot of the settings and stuff like that, I really didn't see us getting a benefit at 1080p, and I kind of think that sucks, because you really can't take advantage of the high refresh rate monitors. You're really just getting whatever you have over your 60 frames per second. So if you have a G-Sync monitor, it's going to look really good, but you're not going to be able to get something, like 144 hertz type thing on the 1080 Ti. And this game does not support SLI yet. So my next thought was to go ahead and turn the graphics down to absolutely low, put everything low at 1080p, and see what we can get from that. See if we can get maybe 120 frames per second. So we definitely got close. We got to about 118 tops, but as soon as you start adding in stuff and you start getting more graphics in there, it looks like dirt. Especially if you're running on a 4K monitor or 4K TV, running at 1080p, it just doesn't look right. Especially if you have a large anything that's over, I'd say 28 inches or 27 inches, 1080p, it looks fuzzy and it looks kind of grated. But now, to my surprise, I basically got the same exact frames per second that I got when I was running everything at high. So if I was at 1080p, running everything high, I was running in the 90s to hundreds, low hundreds. But I pretty much got the same thing night and day that I did on the highest settings. So there was no reason to bring down the graphics here. Just might as well have everything all the way up, because you're going to get the same frames per second. You see my CPU pretty much just stayed around 45 to 50 percent usage, and the GPU was barely working at about half capacity. On 4K, it was maxed out 100% all the way through. So I'm going to say this is definitely a bust if you wanted to try to get more frames by bringing down the graphics settings for 1080p. So I went ahead and did a Hail Mary here, and I decided to drop down to 720p to see if we could actually get over 120 frames per second, and it failed miserably. I pretty much brought everything down. Put everything. Oh, I think I did put everything down. I tried everything low. I tried everything at high, and I still only got about 20 frames per second more. So there is an increase, but it's not that much. I mean, we're looking at 720p versus 1080p and everything maxed out. Everything maxed out on the right and everything low on the left at 720p. You should really see more of an increase to your frames, when you switch that low of a resolution and putting all your graphics down. I do think that there's a few things that are still broken in Monster Hunter World for PC, and you got to remember this just came out on PC, so that port isn't as optimized as it would be on the consoles. So we're gonna have to look for look for some updates that are coming, and hopefully they fix some of that. Now you'll see that the GPU is working a bit less, so it has room to be able to actually do a little bit more, but we're really not seeing a huge change in the frames per second. And the system resources, yeah, you're using a lot less, but I really want to say that some updates could definitely optimize that a little bit more. So that brings me to what I've been saying this whole time, is that the 1440p is definitely where we want to be at with the 1080 Ti and higher end CPUs, even the lower end CPUs, because if you notice, my CPU really doesn't jump up that much. I'm only using like 20 to 40%. Max, I think, was maybe 50% of the CPU, and everything is just maxed out on the GPU anyway. So even if you have a lower end CPU, you should be able to achieve the 60 frames per second or higher with 1440p. So that's the end of this video. I just want to say, definitely check out DigitalFoundry and the video that they did on this, because it really helped me out on finding settings that I want to do. Basically, they did all the work for me, and I didn't. I just had to I watched it, went into great detail on what everything does and how everything is affecting our CPU and GPU. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for watching this video. Definitely hit that like button and subscribe if you're new to the channel, and hit the bell icon to make sure that you can get updates when I upload new videos. Anyway, take care and happy gaming.